What's happening? MC Marcus Chapman here, ready to break down show number 3. Yes, in the MC25. This show was done on August 24th, 2002, from WGCI Chicago, and it's called Guess Who's Back? And here's the backstory, right? All right, I left Chicago initially in September 1999, September 27th to be exact, and went to Indianapolis, did nights there for about 15 months. Then I got hired in Dallas at K104 at the end of the year 2000. And then in August of 2002, I came back to Chicago. So initially, I was coming back. I wasn't supposed to have a particular shift right away. I was just going to do something on the weekend. And I had a full time job working for a company called Media Base, which tracked the what was being played on different stations around the country. So my job at GCI was supposed to be, weekends and filling ins. I really didn't want to do that, but at that point, it was really kind of about getting back in Chicago and also getting a chance to host parties again. Because even though I was on every day in Indianapolis and Dallas, I didn't host nearly as many events as I did when I was in Chicago, just working weekends. Because Indianapolis wasn't really a big club city, it wasn't really a party town. Dallas was, but most of the events were already hosted by other people at K104. It wasn't really a lot left for me to do. So, especially when I was working overnights, I mean, it was cool, but you typically don't get hosting gigs when you work overnights. So I kind of missed that whole balance and dynamic of being on the air and hosting an event. So I was really eager to get to do that again, especially after I had gone to a couple of rock concerts when I was in Dallas. In particular, I went to see Sammy Hagar and David Lee Roth, who were both former lead singers of Van Halen at that time. They were doing a tour in the summer of 2002. I like Sammy Hagar, but I love David Lee Roth. That was my guy right there. And seeing them in concert, especially Roth, it just kind of reminded me of how I had once been on stage, on the mic, and doing my thing too. Not like I was singing or anything, but just having that presence, being on stage, having a party to go to after I got off the air that I was going to be paid for. I kind of missed that, so I was really happy to get the chance to be back on in Chicago to at least be able to do that again. And so what ended up happening, Sam Silk had left GCI and left Chicago about 2 months before I had in the summer of '99. He had gone to Cleveland. While he was in Cleveland, starting sometime in 2001, he started hosting the Saturday night 6 to 10 show on GCI again. He didn't do it in Chicago though. He would stay in Cleveland, and they have something called an ISDN line where it would basically be piped in. It's just like when somebody does a syndicated show, basically. And so Sam was in Cleveland, but he was hosting Saturday nights on GCI. And at a certain point in 2002, the decision was made to have him become the afternoon host on GCI. So he ended up leaving Cleveland and moving back to Chicago to host afternoons. But at this point, he was hosting a Saturday night. And I actually, after I met with program director Elroy Smith and the new assistant PD and music director at the time was a lady named Tiffany Green, I met her and, got back into the station and everything. And so there was a Saturday night where Sam was actually in Chicago doing the show. And I sat in with him just to get, refreshed on the equipment. I had to learn how to run the board because they had changed a lot of the equipment from when I had worked there before. So I sat in with Sam, learned the board. Then the next week he was taking off. So that next week was this particular show, August 24th, 2002. And when I started it off, I had a drop that I got from the Brat when I worked in Indianapolis, which you can hear her freestyle in show number 6 in the MC25. And I was supposed to start off with Sam's intro because typically when you guest star for somebody, you would play their intro, you would do their features. But I broke the rules and I played my own because Saturday Night 6 to 10 had been the spot that I had made my name in Chicago. So I kind of wanted to have a really strong opening to remind people and let people know I was back. And so right after I played my drop from the Brat, I played this thing that I called the Guess Who's Back interlude. And that was actually created when I was in Indianapolis. I had the concept for it, and the production director at the time was a guy named Barrett Turner. So I went in the production room with Barrett and told him what I was looking to do. We took a little piece of Snoop Dogg, or Snoop Doggy Dogg at that time. His song "Ain't No Fun If the Homies Can't Have None." His first line in the song, after some other people rap, is "Guess who's back in the house," and so I just took that little "Guess who's back" part and had it repeat 3 times, and then had my drop from In Vogue where they said my name, Marcus Chapman. That's actually In Vogue saying that, the group. Um, and then repeating the Snoop Dogg thing 3 more times, and then dropping in a little slick Rick from Lottie Dottie saying MC, and then repeating the whole cycle. So Barrett had the idea of, with the Snoop parts, instead of it just saying "Guess who's back, guess who's back, guess who's back," when it said that, he like panned them so that it would go from one speaker to another. So it would be like coming out the left speaker, then the next one would come out the right speaker, and then it would go in the middle. And he kept doing that. So that kind of added a little bit to it. And initially, we created that for me to play when I came back from vacation in July of 2000. I was working in Indianapolis at the WTLC. I did a live broadcast from the Up in Smoke tour, which was Dr. Dre, Snoop Dogg, Eminem, Ice Cube, the whole West Coast, and I hosted the after party, did live broadcasts from the show, from the concert, and all of that. And so that was on July 30th of 2000, which was a Friday night, and I went on vacation right after that. I actually ended up going to Virginia Beach and hung out there for a little while. Then when I came back from vacation, I wanted to have something to let people know I was back. So that's what the Guess Who's Back interlude was originally created for. But I only played it that one time. That one night in Indianapolis was the only time I ever aired it. And it was so good, though. I still had it saved. So I felt it was perfect for me to start off this particular show, letting everybody know I was back in Chicago. So I played the Guess Who's Back interlude. Then I went into my own intro, and then started off the show and let everybody know I was back. And the thing is, when I worked in Chicago, the first time I was just doing weekends, but because I had been gone for 3 years with everyday experience, I sounded a hell of a lot better than I did when I left, even though I sounded good when I left. But doing radio is kind of like, it's a rhythm to it. It's just like exercising or playing a sport or whatever. The more you do it, the better you can get. The more you can work on your skills. So hosting a weekly show, you can work on your skills that way. But when you're on every day, every night, you can build that radio rhythm up. So I had a lot of rhythm because I was coming off of 3 straight years of being on every day pretty much. So when I came back in August 2002, my sound was almost perfect. It was a combination of that everyday experience, me being enthusiastic about coming back home and being able to host parties and all of that stuff. And so when you combine all of those things, it just created what I feel is the best sound I ever had on the radio. It doesn't necessarily mean that the content was better than before or what I did later, because this show and all those little weekend Saturday night shows, those were not content shows. That's a Saturday Night 610 was a vibe show. It was about creating a vibe and tapping into the vibe of being in Chicago on a Saturday night, the energy that was going down, people going out and all of that. It wasn't really about topics or creating any certain kind of dialogue. But there was a little bit of topical discussion in the show, but that wasn't really the main focus. It was about a certain energy on a Saturday night in Chicago. So that's what I was bringing. But the overall sound, I think this was the best I ever sounded on the radio as a whole. And this particular show, once I got rolling, it's like soon as I turn on the mic and I let everybody know, I got a call from one of my boys, Dave Swanson, who I hadn't talked to in years, saying, man, you back in Chicago. And it's funny because I just came from the barbershop getting my haircut from Dave. I just saw him recently here in 2017. But at the time, I hadn't talked to him in years, and, he called, seeing if I was really back, yeah, and then the show just kind of kept rolling from there. And Sam was doing something at the time called the Hood Check, which I didn't really like the name of it, but it was basically the check-in with like me and Dr. Love had done. So I just had people call and check in, let me know where they were at. It was a chance for people to get on the radio, but it was also a chance for me to, kind of hear where the listeners were and, just kind of get a little vibe of Chicago again. And then we had a mix. DJ Magic did it at this particular time. It would later change to DJ Phantom and then later DJ Lil Jon. But Magic did it for this one. And then in the 9 o'clock hour, we had the 99 Countdown, which had been a staple on GCI for years. But in this case, there actually was a topic. I think Sam had started doing a topic inside the 99. And so the person who was in the studio with me that day was Big Papa, who had been in there as an intern when I was hosting the Friday night mix show in Summer 99, Operation Get Down, which is chronicled in show number 25 in MC 25. So Big Papa was in there, and he was the one who let me know that they normally did a topic. And so in this particular case, in 2002, there was an award show airing or being recorded that night, the Soul Train Lady of Soul Awards. And they were giving the Aretha Franklin Entertainer of the Year Award to Ashanti. Now, Ashanti had just came out earlier in 2002. She had some big hits, Foolish and Baby, and there's another one called Happy. And her CD has sold very well, but it was really controversial that she was getting this particular award because a lot of people didn't feel like she deserved it. Like Ashanti, she was pretty. Her singing skills were cool. She actually wrote a lot of her stuff. But one thing about her is her hits, the tracks, the music, those all have been songs that people had heard before. Like people had heard those samples. Like Foolish was mainly known from Notorious B.I.G. One More Chance from 95. Baby had been known from Scarface, Mary Jane. I think that was like 97, 98. So some of her stuff, even though it was popular, a lot of people felt like, well, yeah, people already know these tracks, so it's a little bit different, So a lot of people didn't feel like she deserved to be considered the entertainer of the year when it came to women. So there was actually a petition that was signed online where it was like, I think maybe 20,000 people signed and said she shouldn't get this award. So it was kind of controversial. So we talked about that in the 99 Countdown, and people called in and gave their opinions on whether or not they felt Ashanti should get that award or not, And then throughout the course of the night, I let people know like where parties were. Sam had let me know, who to talk to about being able to mention particular spots. The main ones were Club Mystique, which I think that was the grand opening that night. That was done by a guy who actually worked at GCI, Craig Morton, CMO. He was a sales rep, and he also threw parties. He had done some other ones at several different places and some picnics over the years that were great. And then E2 was also happening. E2 was the old Click, and they had shut down in 99 and reopened in 2000 as E2. And so it's kind of interesting because E2 would end up being the site of the whole party scene changing, and that's actually going to come up in this MC25 in another show. But so I mentioned those clubs, those particular parties. I got paid a little money to do those. I was happy about that. And then at a certain point, that continued on for a while throughout 2002 into early 2003. But for this particular night, August 24th, 2002, that was how the show went. Went to those particular spots that night, to check them out and get paid. And, at the end of the show, you actually hear me say that I was happy to be back home. And I really was. I was excited to be back in Chicago. I was excited to have that kind of energy. It was different from being in Dallas and Indianapolis. Even the songs sounded different, even though it was a lot of the same songs. It was just something about them just sounded different coming through the Chicago airways on the radio or in the studio than they did in the Indianapolis and Dallas studios. That was just how it felt. So I picked this show at number 3, though, because I still think to this day, those 2002 shows that I did when I came back to Chicago, I think that's the best I ever sounded on the air. Again, not my best content, but just sound. And this was the one that kicked it off. This was the one, and I was enthusiastic about being home. I ended up moving back into the apartment complex that I had lived in when I left in '99. And, the whole Guess Who's Back interlude, I actually played that 3 times in the show. I started the show out with it and played it a couple of other times in the show. And it sounded good. I was happy to be back home. And it was just a certain energy and enthusiasm that was there that's captured in this show.